This year's Xbox and Bethesda game showcase kinda blindsided fans with the whole 12 months thing, and as a result, we didn't really get to see many distant first-party games like Hellblade 2, Avowed, or Fable. What we did get an exciting look at, however, was Todd Howard's first big project since Fallout 4, Starfield. Whether it lived up to its massive hype, though, is another question. So let's dive straight in and discuss. First up, why is Starfield such a big deal? Before we get into the nitty-gritty details of how the game looked during the showcase, we've got to set the stage first. You see, there's a reason why Starfield is one of the most highly anticipated RPGs of the last decade. Like, there's Cyberpunk 2077 levels of hype behind this thing. Why does everyone get so excited when it comes to this game in particular, though? Well, the thing is, Bethesda's got an almost flawless record of critically acclaimed RPGs since the 90s, and pretty much every single game that they've released over the past 2 decades has gone on to win multiple Game of the Year awards. But notice how we said almost, because sure, they've stumbled along the way too with side projects like Fallout 76. Also, their games tend to release in a buggy state, but that's not the point. Regardless of all these minor things, their core teams never fail to produce a stellar experience, and Starfield is the culmination of everything that they've built so far. Seriously, this game's been Todd Howard's brainchild since the 90s, but they just didn't have the technology to create an experience that would be fitting enough for their ambitions. These new consoles with their SSDs and faster processing capabilities, however, are apparently powerful enough to finally bring that vision to fruition. Plus, you'll see all their past games' DNA combined to create this super ambitious space adventure that's supposed to hook you in for years to come. Oh, and Bethesda also probably wants to wash the train wreck that was Fallout 76 off its hands. So yes, this is easily the most important game that Todd Howard's probably ever worked on in his decorated long career. So what were the fans' reactions like to Starfield's gameplay? Video game discourse is never a pretty sight, as console fanboys fight over the pettiest of things that you could imagine. So when it was announced last year that Starfield would be an Xbox exclusive, people on the internet already started ripping it apart because, well, it wasn't coming to a platform that they preferred. Also, going into this game, there's been a lot of skepticism over whether Bethesda still got the chops to make a great RPG again. After all, it's been 7 years since Fallout 4 and over a decade since Skyrim. Keeping this in mind, it was pretty obvious that there'd be some form of pushback. Surprisingly though, most reactions online were pretty positive. Like, everyone knew that this would be a Bethesda RPG, so expecting an experience like Fallout in space was a given. Those who had insanely high expectations, however, were left disappointed and aired their frustrations over how it looked, like every other game from the studio. Some people even criticized the creation engine, saying that it's outdated and looks painfully last gen. Oh, and let's not even open the can of worms that was the frame rate. Like, during some of the fight scenes, we saw it dip well below 30 FPS. But then again, that's to be expected, since this game is still almost a year away from release. There were a ton of positives too though. For instance, people loved the character and ship customization. Plus, space combat also looked like a completely new experience. However, as far as the scale of the game is concerned, well, that's a whole other story. Some people were excited at the prospect of how vast this game could be, while others compared it to No Man's Sky, and how that failed to meet everyone's expectations with its procedurally generated planets. Thankfully, Todd Howard had all the answers for us in a later interview. No 1,000 planets in Starfield is not a bad thing. Alright, let's talk about the elephant in the room here. We finally know that Starfield has over 100 different systems and almost 1,000 planets, all open for you to explore at your heart's content. Now, your initial reaction to Starfield's massive scale was probably also positive, like the rest of the gaming community. However, once you start to think about it, especially with the history of Todd Howard making big promises, things start to get a lot less exciting. Like, yes, sure, there are countless open worlds, but how many of them have actual content in them? But that's the thing though, these worlds are not all meant to be packed with people and structures and content because, newsflash, space is empty. Plus, Bethesda's already confirmed that this game has more handcrafted content than all of the other games, so there's nothing to be worried about on that front either. Besides, when you really think about it, if players weren't allowed to go outside a certain boundary in a game about space exploration, wouldn't that kinda defeat the whole purpose of it? Like, there's gotta be a certain level of immersion when you're playing a Bethesda RPG. Oh, and if you still don't like the fact that the majority of planets in the game would be procedurally generated, then you don't have to go to these places. The Golden Path, handcrafted quest, and all that stuff would still be there for you. It's just that when you do decide that you've had enough of walking around the same 5 planets, you can wander off and discover something new. Up next, How does Starfield compare to Fallout 4? Another point of contention after the showcase was the game's visuals. People claim that Starfield doesn't look much better than any of Bethesda's previous games, and everything from the facial animations to the lighting looks shoddy at best. Is there any truth to those sentiments though? Well, the answer would be a resounding no. You see, we often look at older games through a lens of nostalgia and imagine their graphics to be much better than they actually were back in the day. So, if you were actually to pull up Fallout 4 and do a side-by-side comparison, you'll realize that Starfield is a huge leap over that game. Not only do the characters' faces look more detailed, but their animations have seen a massive improvement too. Digital Foundry's also done a brilliant analysis on this very topic. Other than that, even the gunplay has seen a pretty big jump, where now we don't need to rely on crutch systems like VATS. So overall, this new iteration of the creation engine is pretty impressive, especially when you consider Starfield's insane scale and interactability. Just think about it for a sec. This is possibly the most ambitious game ever made. The only other example that comes to mind is Star Citizen, and we all know how that went. And now, are the No Man's Sky comparisons fair? Of course, we can't not talk about the comparison videos that popped up after the showcase, saying that Starfield's a No Man's Sky clone. Like, yes, the game borrows elements from that game, like its procedurally generated planets, some creatures, and even the whole mining for resources thing. But let's be fair here, No Man's Sky didn't invent those things. Also, while there are definitely some visual similarities in how Starfield tackles the whole survival part of its gameplay loop, it's not even close to being like No Man's Sky. You see, the game is a sci-fi space sim, while Bethesda's game is a full-fledged RPG with a story, characters, and deep role-playing systems. It has full combat, over 200,000 lines of dialogue, a gazillion quest lines, and much more. So, while we see why everyone started jumping to conclusions as soon as they saw Starfield, both of these games don't even belong to the same genre. There's just way too much other stuff happening in Todd Howard's game, and in terms of handcrafted content, there's really no comparison between the two. Finally, what's next for Todd Howard? Speaking of Todd Howard, we've also got to touch upon his legacy and where he goes from here. After all, the legendary game director isn't getting any younger. Plus, he's been making games for over 3 decades at this point, which is absolutely insane. Well, according to him, Starfield's always been the game that he wanted to make since the early days of Morrowind. Not only that, but he's also been overseeing other projects under the Bethesda umbrella, like Machine Games' Indiana Jones. So that kind of points to the fact that he's gradually moving to a more hands-off role and preparing the next generation of game directors at Bethesda. Of course, things wouldn't be the same without him at the helm, which is why he stated that he's staying after Starfield to work on Elder Scrolls 6, a game that's already in pre-production. After that, however, things start to get a little more tricky. You see, by the time we get a Skyrim sequel, Todd Howard's going to be nearing his 60s, and at that point, most people start to think about retirement. With that said, whether Elder Scrolls 6 is his swan song or he continues to create stellar games for us afterward like Fallout 5, his impact on the gaming industry is something that we're going to feel for decades to come. That's a wrap for this video. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.